America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Toni and Jamey, Senior Vice President of Operations and Advocacy at Job Creators Network.
And I'm Jamie Bowers, one of the producers here at Main Street Matters.
Today, we're joined by Breitbart's John Carney. John is part of Breitbart News, where he leads the finance and economics section. Welcome, John. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So it's a very exciting time to be in this space. Certainly, I think we're all sort of still coming off of the inaugural high. But taking a step back sort of towards the very sad and tragic end to President Biden's, the end of his administration, I know that you've recently touched on his regulatory agenda, and that is something that is really impactful to the small businesses that, we advocate for. Things like the Inflation Reduction Act certainly exacerbated inflationary pressures on small business owners and Americans, at large. How do you think that things could have looked during the Biden administration had they not inflicted us with things like that?
Look, the American economy was coming back really strongly at the very end of the Trump administration. The Biden administration came in convinced that it got elected mostly to restore normalcy. When people voted for Biden in 2020, they thought they were voting for sort of an end to the pandemic, frankly. I think that they said, okay, I know pulling a lever isn't going to, or however we vote these days, touching the touch screen, isn't going to end the pandemic, but they wanted to move beyond it, and they thought they were voting for competency and normalcy. They didn't get that. And I think that came to as a shock to a lot of people. It wasn't a shock to me. I could have told everybody that there's no way that the Democrats were actually looking at this as a sort of epochal moment of change where they were going to come in and it was going to be not just the New Deal, but a zillion New Deals. They had a Green New Deal. They had, but they were going to not just have the economy recover, but their phrase, build back better, trillions of dollars of spending, unending regulation. And a lot of people say, miss just how this stuff piles up. You put one regulation on top of the other, on top of the other. And even when you're doing things like creating grants for businesses, those are all tied down with so many strings that a lot of businesses actually decided to sit it out. They didn't want all of the red tape that was going to come with it, and so didn't do it. So I think the Biden administration really scored a kind of own goal. It didn't have to be as bad. Inflation, we probably would have had some inflation coming out of the pandemic, but it didn't have to be as bad. The regulatory burden they put on businesses, it didn't have to be that bad. These were policy choices they made. And, thank God we are moving beyond that. And Trump is already, just a couple days in, already issuing hundreds of executive orders that are largely just trying to undo the damage that Biden did.
And we'll certainly touch on those in just a couple of minutes. I do appreciate the soccer reference, by the way. The one thing that I would add to your list is DEI initiatives. You referenced the grants that small businesses were, allegedly available for small businesses. And I actually looked into a few of them because another hat I wear is my husband and I own 3 small businesses in New Jersey. So I I was like, all right, let's see what we've got. And I have to tell you, most of the grants that I looked into, you had to be in a certain zip code, and you had to, check certain DEI boxes to even fill out the application in the first place. How did the DEI initiatives compound on top of all of those other things, and ultimately impact inflation?
Right. So one thing was it really did hold back people's willingness to invest in ways that would allow them to participate in any of these grants, because they knew that if you're tied down this much at the beginning, it was only going to get worse. And these DEI grants had ridiculous things like requirements that you threw a block party in a minority neighborhood, and so that people would know that you had this business going. So if you wanted to, for instance, one of the reasons they installed so few electric charging stations was because the crazy requirements they put on businesses to do this. And it wasn't green requirements, which you might, think, oh, well, don't pollute while you build the charging station. It was, diversity, inclusion, equity, hiring measures, and not just like the traditional things that we used to require were things like, take an advertisement out in a minority newspaper to try to do some recruiting. It went far beyond that. That adds to the cost of participating in these programs. And a lot of businesses didn't want to add to that cost. And by the way, all the money spent on building the DEI compliance that you need to do is money you're not spending in actually running your business and not investing in the business. So it cut off the supply side of the economy. Small businesses create a huge amount of the goods and services we buy in the United States. And when you hamper that with all these regulations, you're going to get more inflation because supply can't run to catch up with the additional demand from all the deficit spending.
It's interesting. There was a lot of talk, after these fires or as these fires are burning in LA about both two things based on the DEI stuff. One is how much money California has spent on DEI initiatives that could have been spent on infrastructure, fire equipment, things like that. There was one study that showed there was that California has spent over $500 million on DEI initiatives. Things like buying 8,000 copies of How to Be an Anti-Racist for one, department, things like that, and then also emphasizing on the hiring side. Clearly there are qualified people of every race, color, creed that could absolutely be in any of these positions. But if you've made identity the number one criteria that you're going to hire on, then there are some possible, bad things that happen. And I think the people in LA have seen those things. And so it's an interesting kind of chickens coming home to roost moment on some of these policies, both from a budgetary standpoint and a leadership standpoint.
I think you got to a really important part of the grifty nature of the DEI industrial complex. You hire a consultant to say, well, what do we need to do to do DEI? The consultant says, first, you got to buy 10,000 copies of my book. The next thing they do is they say, you have to hire 4 of my mentees to come into your department and teach you how to do this. Each of those people then has their own department and says, well, I need 15 more people underneath me. So when people are wondering, how can you possibly spend $1 billion on DEI? This is how, because it multiplies the costs. And fundamentally, it is a grift. It is the people's coming and selling a snake oil that they say will improve business, will improve operations, and it doesn't. There's actually no evidence that shows that I think in a lot of fields, it does make sense to have a diversity of points of view coming into for people to say, I have lots of different experience. I have lots of different points of view. But the way they were doing DEI, as you were saying, this really hardcore quota type hiring doesn't improve business at all. It doesn't improve government operations. In fact, it hurts it. And I think that's what we discovered over the last 4 years.
Well, I always thought it was very interesting, as you saw, 2 or 3 years ago, it was very in vogue for big companies to hire a C-level person who was like the chief DEI officer. And to me, if you do that, you are essentially creating a diversity problem that will never be solved, because that person has a mortgage. They have kids who are going to college. Like, they're not going to show up one day and say, you know what, we solved all the problems. We're all good here. Yeah, and I thought, boy, talk about committing to having a problem for eternity when you hire that position and you create that position.
That's right. The person's job would be threatened if they ever said, yes, we have now achieved the perfect workplace, and I will go on my way. Of course, that's never going to happen. They're always going to say, actually, the problem got worse, right? Which is what happened, right? Like the money, they keep coming up with new reasons to spend the money, new regulations, new rules. And I think part of the fear of a lot of people when Biden was riding high, he was never that popular, but when he first came into office, was that we might be facing an escalation of this type of ESG, DEI regulation forever. And so the good news of getting Donald Trump elected is that we're not facing it forever. What did Barack Obama used to like to talk about, the arc of history, right? The arc of history doesn't just bend to more DEI on our throats forever. It actually bends towards freedom again. And we are seeing that now. And I think that's one of the reasons you're seeing in surveys of businesses a new spirit of optimism, because they were pretty depressed by what was happening. And now they see that we have a chance to reverse it.
Our foundation does its own polling monthly, and we started to see it, almost immediately before he was even sworn into office. People finally had some hope, and they knew that the tide was truly turning, and that a lot of this was at least going to be kind of put on the back burner. But we saw late last night, President Trump issued an executive order, excuse me, completely eliminating the DEI employees who are, all being sent home on unpaid leave. Lucky for them, because there's some, contractual obligations that the federal government has to keep at this point. But, we can only hope that this is the beginning. How sustainable do you think the momentum that President Trump has right now will be? And what lessons can President Trump learn from all of the mistakes, from Bidenflation and, forward, all of the mistakes that the previous administration committed?
Well, I think the first thing is that these executive orders that the president is issuing are really just the beginning. This is going to be a fight that goes on for years. They're going to sue we've had, I think, 180 executive orders. There's going to be 360 lawsuits against the 180 executive orders. They will fight tooth and nail. They will engage in lawfare to try to stop this stuff. It's actually one of the good reasons to bring this many lawsuits, frankly, is because when you are this many executive orders, is it actually may wear out some of the resources of the lawfare left to try to fight against this. You just keep issuing the orders, but you have to fight. You also have to make sure, and this was an important thing Trump did, and I'm glad he did it. You can't just eliminate the offices of DEI. You have to get rid of the people who are serving that function, because what will happen is people will rename it they'll give it some more innocuous name. They called it DEI when that was in fashion. They'll call it the opportunity and equality division, right? They'll just rename it, and all the people will still be doing the same terrible things. You'll have made some, I guess, rhetorical and symbolic progress, but you really have to get rid of the people whose jobs who are doing this, because they were, frankly, up to no good. They were ideologues in our government. They need to go. Trump probably can't fire them, or at least he's not sure if he can fire them all. But putting them on leave right away is a great idea. Don't let them create the problem, any more problems, and figure out a way to get rid of them altogether.
We certainly see in so much of what he's done already how much he has learned and really matured as a president. I mean, that has been just the most profound thing for me personally to watch. He originally went to Washington to drain the swamp, and discovered, like we all did, that it's not that easy to drain it. But now he's had time to really strategize around a lot of the bureaucracy and the nonsense that people in Washington D.C. are often straddled with. Another thing that he's done is withdraw from the Paris Climate Accords, and he has spoken at length about U.S. energy production and sort of what the Biden administration, what their actions, how they hamstrung us and correlated to inflation. What do you think the specific impacts of withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord will be?
I think it's very important to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord and to the other executive orders about energy, which is basically announcing that it is the policy of the United States government to expand energy production, extraction, that we are no longer in the business. The Biden administration says that they said they weren't waging a war against fossil fuels, but of course they were. That was a lie. And when you tell people that you are trying to eliminate their business line in the next 10 years or the next 20 years, what does that do? It dries up investment into that business line. If you owned a concrete company and I told you we were going to ban concrete in construction from now on, would you put more money into making concrete? No, you would let the plants run down. So that's what the threat was. That's what was holding back energy production in the U.S. You'll hear the left sometimes say, well, no, we're producing a lot of energy. But the rate of growth of energy production has not kept up with the rate of growth of the economy or the demands of the economy. We need far more energy than we did just 4 years ago. And we are probably going to need even more of it because a lot of the technologies that people are coming out with, particularly artificial intelligence, is very, very energy intensive. So we need to be ramping up to produce more energy, not less. The Biden administration tried to have it both ways. They said, oh, no, we want you to have cheap gasoline, but we're also going to make it so that it's unprofitable to invest in fossil fuels in the future. And I think the end to that and the leaving the Paris Climate Accord again is a very important signal because it says we are not at war with fossil fuels. We are actually going to seek, not just for our own country, by the way, but for the rest of the world, we could be the strategic energy provider so that you don't have to be dependent on tyrannies. You don't have to worry about what Putin does, whether you can get your natural gas if you're in Europe. You can actually say, look, we have a benevolent, friendly country called the United States that will supply the world with our energy needs. We can do that. We don't need anybody else. The United States, a friend of mine used to say, it was a sign that God loves America more than any other country in the world because he put so much coal, so much oil, so much natural gas under our country. This is amazing. We can do it. Trump is unleashing energy abundance and energy dominance again. And I think it's going to make a big difference.
One of the things, which is interesting, clearly President Trump has put in a bunch of new executive orders. But as we saw with the Biden administration, if these things are all done by executive order and they flip-flop every 4 years or every 8 years, one of the things small businesses really appreciate is some consistency. So what are some of the legislative priorities we should look for in the next year that will make some more permanent changes than just executive orders from the White House?
So you're absolutely right. Look, the executive orders are a good starting place, but we should legislate it. Congress needs to enact laws so that businesses can know, look, unless we amend the Constitution, laws can be changed. But laws are harder to change than executive orders. They can be changed with just the stroke of a pen. We actually need legislation. One of the most important things I think that Congress can do, and they are going to do very quickly is make permanent the tax cuts that Donald Trump put in place in his first term. This is critically important to a lot of small businesses that are pass-through entities and therefore are taxed at the individual level. Look, the corporate level tax was made permanent. But when Biden was saying he wasn't going to tax anybody earning over $400,000, the secret there is he was going to raise taxes on small businesses all across America that have more than $400,000 of profits. And that was going to be a very big tax hit. In fact, it was I would say, not a mortal threat to the economy, but it threatened to kick us into a recession if those tax cuts had hit. So it's very important that Congress act not to just extend the tax cuts, but to make them permanent, so that businesses can plan when they're investing. They will know what their tax rate will be so that they can plan this into the future. They know that it's not going to go away in just a couple of years.
You are certainly speaking our language. For anybody that's listening who might be a small business owner and is interested in helping us make sure that Congress makes the Tax Cuts and Job Act permanent, please visit taxcutswork.com and learn about how you can join us in the fight to spread the word about making sure that everything that John just referenced comes to fruition. So that's my little plug there. Thank you, John. You teed that up perfectly.
We didn't plan that in advance, by the way.
I know, that was great. Tell our audience, please, where they can find your newsletter and any more additional information about you.
Sure. So go to breitbart.com/economy. You'll find all our economics coverage. We also put out a daily newsletter called the Breitbart Business Digest. It really gets to the heart of not just what's happening in the economy, but what it means going forward and how that affects businesses, investors. It is geared at the people who are watching this show, frankly. And so I really, and then of course, you can follow me personally on X. I am formerly Twitter. It is, it's just my last name. It's on the screen right now. It's at Carney, Carney. I joined early enough that I was able to get my last name, which is pretty cool. But it's a good lesson. I didn't know whether I would use Twitter as much as I did, and I did, and I'm even happier with it now under Elon Musk. But look, so Breitbart.com, the Breitbart Business Digest, again, it's free newsletter, comes into your email box every day. You can also check it on the website, and I'm at Carney on Twitter.
Well, John, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today on Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. And thank you all for taking the time to listen. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. You can subscribe at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcast. And we will be back very soon with another episode. Goodbye for now.